Corley, can you step away from the desk?
Why? What paperwork are you talking about?
The church bank account is missing
I
money.
don't understand. There are deposits, offerings, checks, transfers. I need to see which pages you mean.
Hope R. Corley served as treasurer of Mount Vernon Missionary Baptist Church for years, and not one person checked the account she controlled alone. By the time someone finally did, $80,000 of tithe money was gone.
The withdrawals from June through February are being reviewed.
That's months of records. I can't answer that standing here like this without the books, and I don't...
She would not get the chance to explain it to the deacons. Within 4 months of the first call to the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office, detectives had walked the bank statements line by line and traced every unauthorized withdrawal to a single signature. 8 months, approximately $80,000. One bank account belonging to a small country church next to a Rosenwald schoolhouse, older than anyone in the congregation. Hope Corley had been Mount Vernon Missionary Baptist Church's treasurer long enough that no one questioned the deposits and no one audited the withdrawals. Until the morning the pastor finally looked at the statement himself. Before we go any further, I have to ask, have you ever sat in a small church on a Sunday morning and dropped a folded 20 into the collection plate without thinking twice about where it was going? Tell me about that church in the comments. Tell me what it meant to you, and subscribe if you haven't yet, because this channel covers the cases that small-town newspapers bury on page 6. We don't let these stories disappear. Hope Renee Corley was born in November of 1968 in Lincolnton, North Carolina, the second of 3 daughters in a family whose roots in Lincoln County ran 4 generations deep. Her father, Eugene Carpenter Sr., worked the assembly line at the Cochran Furniture Plant in Lincolnton from the year he came home from Vietnam until the plant shuttered in 2007. Her mother, Vernon Carpenter, kept the books for a small flooring contractor on East Main Street and sang second alto in the choir at Mount Vernon Missionary Baptist Church every Sunday morning of Hope's childhood. The Carpenter family had been members of Mount Vernon for as long as the church had a roll book. Hope's grandfather helped pour the concrete for the current sanctuary in 1958, and her great-grandmother's name was carved into the stone marker for the building fund out front. The church sat on Old Plank Road in the Iron Station community, directly beside the Mount Vernon Rosenwald School, a 1-story frame building constructed in the 1920s with money from the Julius Rosenwald Fund. By the time Hope was old enough to walk into the sanctuary on her own, the Rosenwald School was no longer a school. It was a community landmark. The church and the schoolhouse together formed the institutional center of the small black community that had grown up around them. Hope was a quiet child, the kind of student teachers wrote the same word about on every report card: reliable. That was the word that followed her from 2nd grade through Lincolnton High School. Reliable enough to be trusted with the lunch money envelope in 4th grade. Reliable enough to count the offering plate at Vacation Bible School at age 12. She graduated from Lincolnton High School in 1986 and enrolled at Gaston College in nearby Dallas, North Carolina, where she earned an associate's degree in business administration in 1988. She married Cornell Eugene Corley in the spring of 1989 at Mount Vernon Missionary Baptist Church. Her father walked her down the aisle. The deacons gave her away. Cornell was a refrigeration mechanic at a regional grocery chain. Hope went to work as a bookkeeper for a small accounting practice on Government Drive in Lincolnton, processing payroll for local contractors and small businesses. She made $9.50 an hour. By 1995, she had passed her notary public certification and was earning $14.25 an hour. By 2003, she had been promoted to office manager. Her supervisor at the accounting firm wrote in a 2007 performance review that Hope was meticulous with the ledger, careful with client confidence, and trusted with the firm's most sensitive accounts. Another review the following year noted she had never once been short a penny at month-end reconciliation. She was the kind of bookkeeper whose desk had a handwritten tab system for client folders and a sticky note on her monitor that read, "Measure twice, post once." Hope and Cornell had 2 children. Their daughter Aaliyah was born in 1991. Their son Cornell Jr., known to everyone as CJ, was born in 1995. They bought a small brick ranch on Webb's Road in Iron Station in 1997, less than 3 miles from Mount Vernon, and they raised both children inside the same pews Hope had grown up in. She sang in the choir until her voice gave out one Easter Sunday in 2009, after which she rotated to the kitchen ministry and the Sunday school curriculum committee. She served as the church clerk from 2011 to 2014. She organized the homecoming dinners. She drove the older members to medical appointments in Charlotte when their families couldn't get off work. She was, in the language Pastor Beeman would later use in his statement to detectives, the one we never had to ask twice. In the fall of 2015, the church's longtime treasurer, an elderly deacon named Bishop Cleveland Wingate, retired from the position after 18 years. The deacon board met on a Tuesday night in October. The vote to appoint Hope Corley as the new treasurer of Mount Vernon Missionary Baptist Church was unanimous. She accepted the responsibility in front of the congregation the following Sunday, hand on the pulpit Bible, in a navy blue suit her mother had given her for Christmas the year before. The pastor at the time, Reverend Caleb Beeman, prayed over her appointment. She wept during the prayer. She told her husband afterward that she had never felt so honored in her life. For 9 years, she was the treasurer the church needed her to be. Mount Vernon Missionary Baptist Church operated on the same financial structure that most small rural churches in Lincoln County operated on. There was no business office. There was no full-time staff. There was a pastor, a board of 5 deacons, a trustee board of 3, and a treasurer. The treasurer was the only official with operational access to the church's bank account. The account was held at the First National Bank branch on East Main Street in Lincolnton, less than a 15-minute drive from the church. The church had banked there since the 1970s. Every dollar the congregation gave passed through that single account. The tithes that came in folded inside white envelopes on Sunday morning. The loose bills dropped into the offering plate. The checks mailed in by members who couldn't make services. The occasional larger gifts from estates of members who had passed. Everything went into one account. Everything came out of one account. The financial process was the kind of process that has been the same in small Baptist churches for 100 years. After the Sunday morning service, the ushers carried the offering plates to the back room. 2 designated counting committee members, usually a deacon and 1 rotating church member, opened the envelopes, separated cash from checks, and tallied the total on a triplicate deposit slip. They sealed the deposit in a canvas bag with the bank's lock. 1 copy of the deposit slip stayed in the church safe. 1 went into the treasurer's records. 1 went into the bank bag. On Monday morning, the treasurer carried the bag to First National and made the deposit. The treasurer alone reconciled the bank statements when they arrived. The treasurer alone wrote the checks for the light bill and the gas bill and the water bill and the pastor's salary. The treasurer alone executed any transfers, withdrawals, or electronic payments out of the account. The institutional check on that structure was the deacon's quarterly review. 4 times a year, the deacon board sat down with the treasurer and went over a 1-page financial summary the treasurer prepared. The summary showed beginning balance, total receipts, total disbursements, and ending balance. The deacons did not, as a rule, pull the bank statements themselves. They trusted the summary. They trusted the treasurer. That was the institutional check, and that was the institutional vulnerability. Mount Vernon's congregation in the 2020s averaged between 60 and 80 people on a given Sunday morning. The annual budget hovered around $110,000. Roughly 2/3 of that went to the building, the utilities, and the pastor's modest compensation. The remaining third paid for community outreach, the children's ministry supplies, the Christmas baskets for the elderly members, and the small repairs the 80-year-old sanctuary required on a nearly continuous basis. There was no surplus. There was no rainy day fund of meaningful size. The church operated, as it had always operated, hand to mouth on the faith of its members and the dollar bills they slid into the plate. That is the system, a single account, a single treasurer. Quarterly review of a summary, the treasurer wrote herself. The congregation gave because they trusted the church to honor the gift. The deacons signed off because they trusted the treasurer. The structure had worked at Mount Vernon for 68 years. It had worked because every treasurer before Hope Corley had been honest. The first unauthorized withdrawal cleared the Mount Vernon Missionary Baptist Church account on June 11, 2025. It was a Wednesday. The amount was $1,840. To anyone reviewing the bank statement, the withdrawal appeared as an ordinary debit. There was no obvious red flag. The dollar amount was inside the range of legitimate church expenditures: a roof patch, a plumbing repair, a bulk supply order, the kind of disbursement that happened 5 or 6 times a month in any small church. The withdrawal was recorded in the church's books, but the entry in the church's books showed it as a payment to a vendor. There was no vendor. The money had been transferred to Hope Corley's personal checking account at a different bank. The second withdrawal came 8 days later, on June 19th, $2,200. The third came on July 2nd, $1,575. By the end of July 2025, 6 unauthorized withdrawals had moved more than $11,000 out of the church account and into accounts Hope Corley controlled. The pattern that emerged over the 8 months between June 2025 and February 2026 was the pattern of a bookkeeper who understood her own institution's controls better than anyone else did. The withdrawals were never round numbers: 1840, 2200, 1575, 3415. The amounts mimicked the irregularity of real church expenses. They were sized to stay below the dollar threshold that would have triggered a question from any deacon glancing at the summary. The withdrawals were spaced. They never clustered. They moved in rhythm with the church's normal disbursement schedule, going out on the days when other legitimate expenses were also leaving the account. They were labeled in the church's internal ledger with names of vendors and contractors that sounded reasonable: a heating company, a printing service, a landscaping outfit. The deacons, when they reviewed the quarterly summary, saw line items that looked exactly like what line items always looked like at Mount Vernon. The escalation came in the fall. In September 2025, the withdrawals doubled in frequency. By October, money was moving out of the account on a near-weekly basis. The dollar amounts climbed: a $4,700 transfer in early October, a $5,200 transfer 2 weeks later. The November 2025 statement, had anyone other than Hope Corley been reviewing it, would have showed approximately $14,300 in unauthorized debits in a single 30-day window. But no one other than Hope Corley was reviewing it. The October deacon review was conducted on the basis of the summary she prepared. The summary showed a normal month. The deacons asked their normal questions. She gave her normal answers. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. They prayed at the end and they went home. She knew the review schedule. She had been a bookkeeper for 31 years and the treasurer of this church for 10. She knew that the deacons met quarterly. She knew that the audit was a glance at a 1-page summary. She knew that the bank statements arrived at the church's post office box, which she alone had the key to. She knew that the only way the scheme would surface was if someone went looking, and she knew that no one at Mount Vernon had ever gone looking in the entire 68-year history of the building. The signs were there for anyone who had been close enough to see them. Hope had paid off Cornell's truck in August 2025, 18 months early. She had paid cash for a used Lexus ES that her daughter Aaliyah drove down from Charlotte to pick up in October. She bought new countertops for the kitchen of the Webb's Roadhouse in November. She paid for her son CJ's wedding rehearsal dinner at a restaurant in Mooresville in January 2026 and put the entire $3,800 bill on a debit card. The members of the congregation noticed nothing. The deacons noticed nothing. Cornell, who later told detectives he had assumed the money came from a tax refund and a bonus from the accounting firm, noticed nothing. The treasurer of a small country church does not have to explain her household finances to anyone, and Hope Corley did not. By the end of February 2026, the total Hope Corley had moved out of the Mount Vernon Missionary Baptist Church bank account stood at approximately $80,000. The church's operating balance, which should have been around $32,000 going into the spring, was under $4,000. That is when the boiler at the sanctuary failed. The boiler in the basement of Mount Vernon Missionary Baptist Church was 41 years old. It had been patched and repatched through the late 2010s. On the morning of Saturday, February 28, 2026, the heating contractor who had serviced the unit for the last decade walked into the basement, took one look at the cracked manifold, and told Deacon Eldridge Sherrill that the unit was beyond repair. A replacement would run approximately $9,400 installed. Deacon Sherrill called Hope Corley that afternoon. He asked her to cut a check for the deposit on Monday morning so they could have heat in the sanctuary by the following Sunday. Hope told him she would handle it. She did not handle it. On Monday, March the 2nd, the heating contractor called Deacon Sherrill back. The deposit had not arrived. Hope was not answering her phone. Sherrill drove to the church, let himself into the office with his deacon's key, and looked at the small green ledger book Hope had kept on the corner of the desk for the last decade. The ledger showed an operating balance of $31,400. Deacon Sherrill picked up the phone and called First National Bank. He gave them the church's account number. He asked for the current balance. The woman on the other end of the line told him the account contained $3,847.16. He asked her to repeat the number. She repeated the number. Deacon Sherrill drove home. He sat at his kitchen table for 40 minutes before he called Pastor Beeman. The pastor drove over. The two men sat together at the deacon's kitchen table and called the chairman of the deacon board, a 68-year-old retired postal worker named Roosevelt Penninger. The three of them agreed not to confront Hope Corley directly. They agreed to gather the bank statements first. On Tuesday, March 3rd, Pastor Beeman and Deacon Penninger drove to the First National branch on East Main Street and requested printed statements for the church account going back 12 months. The branch manager handed them a stack of paper approximately an inch thick. They sat in the branch's small conference room and began turning pages. It did not take them an hour. The deposits matched what they remembered. The withdrawals did not. They saw withdrawal after withdrawal that did not correspond to any vendor they recognized. They saw transfer after transfer that did not correspond to any expense they had approved. They saw the dates and the amounts of the unauthorized debits stretching back to the previous summer, page after page, in a steady cadence that had not stopped in 9 months. Pastor Beeman, in a statement he would later give to investigators, said the moment he understood what he was looking at was the moment his hand stopped turning pages, and he said the word Lord out loud in the conference room of the bank. On Wednesday morning, March 4, 2026, Pastor Beeman walked into the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office in downtown Lincolnton and reported that a significant amount of money was missing from the bank account of Mount Vernon Missionary Baptist Church. He handed the desk officer a manila envelope containing 12 months of statements. He sat in the lobby for 2.5 hours waiting for a detective. The detective who caught the case was Detective Darrell Hovis of the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office Financial Crimes Unit. Hovis had spent 14 years on patrol before transferring to financial crimes in 2021. He was the kind of detective who carried a calculator in his shirt pocket and worked cases at his desk with a yellow legal pad and a mechanical pencil. Hovis took Pastor Beeman into a small interview room. He listened for 40 minutes. He took the envelope of statements. He told the pastor he would be in touch within 72 hours. The next morning, Hovis served a subpoena on First National Bank for the complete account records of Mount Vernon Missionary Baptist Church, covering the period January 2024 through March 2026. The bank delivered the records, including digital images of every cleared check, every signed withdrawal slip, and every wire transfer authorization tied to the account. Hovis spread the records across his desk and began the work that small account embezzlement investigations always come down to. He matched debits to documentation. The pattern emerged in a single afternoon. Every legitimate church expense had a corresponding paper trail. The light bill had a payment record from Duke Energy. The water bill had a record from the Lincoln County Water Authority. The pastor's salary had a check signed and endorsed and deposited at the pastor's bank. Every line item that matched a legitimate expense was clean. The unauthorized debits did not match any legitimate expense. They were transfers initiated by Hope Corley using her treasurer's online banking access. The destination account was traceable. Harven pulled a second subpoena, this one for the records of Hope Corley's personal checking account at a second institution, a regional credit union with a branch in Denver, North Carolina. The credit union's records closed the loop. Every unauthorized transfer out of the Mount Vernon account had cleared into Hope Corley's personal account, sometimes within an hour, sometimes the same day. Approximately $80,000 in net transfers over the 8-month window, beginning June 11, 2025, and ending February 24, 2026. The money had not stayed in the credit union account. Harven traced it outward. He pulled the credit union's debit card transaction history. He found the truck payoff on August 14, 2025, $11,200 to a regional auto lender. He found the Lexus purchase on October 7th, $14,800 in the form of a cashier's check to a used car lot in Mooresville. He found the kitchen contractor in November, $6,750 to a granite installer in Stanley. He found the rehearsal dinner, $3,847 to a steakhouse on Highway 150. He found a credit card payoff to a Discover account in Hope Corley's name in December, $9,200, retiring a balance that had been carried for years. He found smaller things, a washer and dryer set, a new lawn tractor, auto repairs, groceries, the mundane texture of a household budget that had quietly stopped feeling pinched somewhere in the summer of 2025 and never returned to feeling pinched again. Harven interviewed Deacon Penninger, Deacon Sherrill, and Pastor Beeman at the church on Friday, March 13th. He asked them to walk him through the quarterly summary process. He asked who had access to the account, who had access to the post office box, and who reconciled the statements. He wrote the same answer to all 3 questions in his notebook. Hope Corley, Hope Corley, Hope Corley. He pulled the church's internal ledger from the desk drawer Deacon Sherrill had first opened on March 2nd. He flipped to the entries that corresponded to the unauthorized debits. Every fraudulent withdrawal had been entered in the ledger as a payment to a vendor that did not exist. The handwriting on every entry was the same. He photographed the pages. He sealed the ledger in an evidence bag. By the end of March, Detective Harven had built a case file that was, in the words of his supervisor, as clean a small dollar embezzlement workup as we have ever turned over to the district attorney. We're heading into the arrest now. Before we do, if this case is making you think about the small church, or the volunteer board, or the youth league treasurer you give your money to, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Tell me whether anybody in your life has ever been in that kind of position. And subscribe if you haven't yet. We cover the cases that don't make the cable news because they should. The warrant for Hope Corley's arrest was signed by a Lincoln County magistrate on the afternoon of Tuesday, April 7th, 2026. The charge was felony embezzlement under North Carolina General Statute, Section 14-90. Detective Harven and 2 uniformed deputies drove out to the brick ranch on Webb's Road shortly after 8 o'clock on the morning of Wednesday, April 8th. Hope Corley was in the kitchen. She had just put on a pot of coffee. Cornell had already left for work. She was wearing a navy fleece jacket over a beige blouse, her glasses pushed up on her forehead. She had a green ceramic mug in her hand when she opened the door. Harven identified himself. He told her he had a warrant for her arrest. He asked her to step out onto the front porch. She did not step out onto the porch. She stood in the doorway and looked at the 3 of them for a long moment without speaking. The mug stayed in her hand. The deputies later wrote that she did not appear surprised. They wrote that she appeared, in the words of the report, as if she had been waiting for the knock for some time. Detective Harven: Mrs. Corley, we need you to step out of the house, ma'am. Hope Corley: Is this about the church? Detective Harven: Yes, ma'am, it is. Hope Corley: I figured. She set the mug down on the small table by the door. She asked if she could go upstairs and get her purse. Harven told her one of the deputies would accompany her. She walked upstairs with the female deputy. She came back down with a black handbag and a sweater. She did not cry. She did not protest. She asked the deputies if she could lock the front door behind her. They told her she could. In the back of the patrol car on the drive to the Harven A. Crouse Detention Center in Lincolnton, she spoke twice. Once, to ask the deputy in the driver's seat to turn the heat down. Once, to ask whether the pastor knew yet that she had been arrested. The deputy told her she didn't know what the pastor knew. Hope Corley nodded and did not speak again for the remainder of the ride. She was booked into Harven A. Crouse at 9:34 in the morning. The magistrate set bond at $50,000 secured. Bail hearing was scheduled for April 15th. Her one phone call was to Cornell. The conversation, according to the call log, lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds. She did not call a lawyer until the next morning. The story of what happened to Hope Corley after April 8, 2026, is still being written because the courtroom proceedings are still ahead of her. She is presumed innocent until proven guilty, and the district attorney's office has not yet taken the case past arraignment. Embezzlement under North Carolina General Statute 14-90 is a Class H felony in the amount range at issue here. A first-time offender with no prior record faces a presumptive sentencing range of 4 to 25 months on a single count, with the upper end driven by the dollar amount and the aggravating factors a prosecutor chooses to argue. The Lincoln County District Attorney's Office, in a brief statement released the day of the arrest, indicated it would seek both incarceration and full restitution if the case proceeds to conviction. The bail hearing on April 15, 2026, was held in district court before Judge Rebecca Eaker. Hope Corley appeared in a tan jail uniform. Her hair was pulled back. She did not look at the gallery. Cornell sat in the second row. Their daughter, Aaliyah, sat next to him. CJ could not get the time off from work in Charlotte and was not present. Defense counsel was a Lincolnton attorney named Whitman Hefner. Hefner argued for a reduction in bond on the basis that his client had no prior record, deep community ties, and a 31-year history of stable employment. He noted that she had voluntarily surrendered her passport when deputies asked for it during booking. He noted that the family home was paid for. He argued that she presented no flight risk and was prepared to comply with any conditions of release the court chose to impose. Assistant District Attorney Larkin Reep argued against any reduction. Reep told the court that the defendant had spent 8 months systematically draining a small church bank account, that the amount involved represented the operating budget of an institution dependent on the donations of its members, and that the breach of trust at issue was, in the Assistant District Attorney's words, the kind that does damage no restitution check will ever undo. Reep asked the court to maintain bond at $50,000 secured. Judge Eaker maintained the bond. She set a probable cause hearing for May 6, 2026. She ordered Hope Corley to have no contact, direct or indirect, with any member of the Mount Vernon Missionary Baptist Church congregation as a condition of any release. Cornell posted the secured bond through a Gastonia bondsman the following day. Hope Corley was released from Harven A. Crouse on the afternoon of April 16, 2026, and walked out a side door of the detention center to avoid the small group of reporters in the parking lot. She has not returned to Mount Vernon Missionary Baptist Church. In the weeks after the arrest, the congregation met on a Wednesday night in the fellowship hall to discuss what had happened. Pastor Beeman read a statement. Deacon Penninger read a statement. The chairman of the trustee board, a 71-year-old woman named Geneva Hovis Avery, asked the congregation to consider how to move forward. Several members wept. One older woman stood up and said she had given the church a portion of her late husband's life insurance settlement 2 summers earlier, and she wanted to know if any of that money was among what had been taken. Pastor Beeman told her that everything that had gone into the account between June and February had been touched. He could not tell her which of her individual dollars had been stolen and which had paid the light bill. The church voted that night to engage an outside accountant to audit the books going back 5 years. They voted to restructure the treasurer's position. Going forward at Mount Vernon, no single person would hold both deposit authority and withdrawal authority. The deacons would pull the bank statements directly from First National every month, in person, without the treasurer's involvement. The summaries would be checked against the statements line by line. The boiler in the basement was replaced in late April. The money to replace it came from a love offering taken up by 3 sister churches in the Iron Station and Denver communities. Members of those congregations dropped envelopes into a collection plate that was passed around for that single purpose. The total raised exceeded the cost of the boiler by approximately $1,400. The surplus was set aside to begin rebuilding the operating balance Hope Corley had drained. The Rosenwald School next door still stands. The historical marker out front still names the families who built the church. The congregation still gathers on Sunday morning. The trust will take longer to rebuild than the balance sheet. This case was hard to sit with, but the case on the right-hand side of your screen right now is the one that has stayed with me the longest. Click it.